well. I did prepare some stuff with a presentation, so we're gonna make it nice. Um, so yeah, before we begin, any questions before we start? Otherwise, I'll just start with the presentation. Let's see. I see one person is typing. Let's see if it's a question or not. Yeah. So today's gonna be a deep dive into the brain again. So I gotta have your guys' full attention for some stuff because it's gonna be something. Um, I'm diving into specifically the fear of losing trades, for example, right? Some people are fearful to open trades because they are fearful of losing one, right? So we're gonna dive into the mechanics behind why that actually happens, right? You love dopamine, unfortunately. Yeah, somewhat similar. Yeah. Well, today we're not gonna talk a lot about dopamine, but actually something quite the opposite of it, Topo. So prepare. So yeah, in yeah, it is going to be recorded for sure. I am recording right now and already tested to make sure the microphone, everything works, so we don't have any issues. Um, in trading, emotions are usually grouped, right, in two main categories. That's what we usually look at: greed and fear. Going to the gym, have fun, man. Enjoy the workout. Um, in the earlier streams, we already discussed greed. We already discussed FOMO, the fear of missing out. And we already discussed obsession, right? And then especially related to dopamine, right? But in this stream, we're going to focus on the other side of the spectrum, right? Fear, anxiety, stress, uncertainty, right? You can group those together. And thank you for doing this. Hey, it's my pleasure, man. I enjoy doing this. To make things clear, I kind of structured it into two parts, right? Um, and the first part is this stream, and we're going to be explaining the processes behind all the feelings, and we're going to ask the right questions, right? Let's start with like an important idea, right? Um, Opening a trade is seen by the body as a threat, right? That's unfortunately the way it works for a lot of people, right? Because money is attached to a trade, and we're very inclined and very emotionally driven, especially when it comes to money. And therefore, opening a trade is often seen by the body as a threat immediately, right? Which naturally creates stress. And not all stress is bad, right? A very mild amount of stress can help because it sharpens our focus, it can boost our learning, and it helps us store experiences in memory, right? That's very important. But on the other side, when stress is too intense, or let's say it lasts too long, then it starts to work against us and it can wear down the body and the mind, right? So, losses in trading can trigger this kind of stronger stress. And the exact impact, of course, varies from person to person. But in most cases, uncontrolled stress tends to harm the nervous system and overall health. And I'll explain that more in detail later. Recording of the stream will be available inside the external resources later and on my YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out. When we release it, I'll notify the Discord. Yeah, exactly. So what matters now is whenever we face a perceived threat, the body reacts in a fairly predictable way. And we'll have a look at the full range of those reactions, right? The first part, let's see. It's all inside the mind, right? Inside us all. The first part we're going to look at, right? When a person faces a threat, we have this part of the brain, the amygdala, and that will be activated. And this is an important structure that triggers the emergence of fear, anxiety, stress, and the response to a threat, right? And this part, the amygdala, has numerous connections with other structures that determine the response of threats, right? So let's examine the interactions with these structures one by one, right? And I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible because this can get quite theoretical, but I've made sure to summarize it everything in an easy way to understand. Sorry. So the first part we're going to look at is cortisol. Type a 1 in the chat if you've ever heard about cortisol. People know it already. Let's go. That's good. Basically, for the people that don't know, cortisol, very simply put, is the stress hormone inside our body, right? When we are stressed, our body produces cortisol, right? And to understand stress, we need to talk a little bit about biology. And I'll try to keep the terminology simple and only use it when actually necessary. So, when the brain senses a threat, what happens inside your brain is a chain reaction starts to go off, right? And the first part is a part of the brain called the amygdala sends a signal to this part right here, or to the hypothalamus, right, which is the control center for a lot of bodily functions, right? Then that part, the hypothalamus, activates the HPA axis, and the HPA axis is the body's main stress response system. Then the hypothalamus releases a chemical, right, called CRH, and that CRH then tells a different part of our brain, a small gland basically at the base of our brain, to release another chemical, right? So you see what's happening? Whenever stress starts to come in, your brain will start to give off a chain reaction and basically send signals throughout the brain that certain chemicals need to be produced. That's basically what it is, right? This chemical that I last mentioned, CRH, tells that small gland at the base of the brain to release another chemical, and that's called ACTH. That's like the abbreviation of it. You don't need to know the full name. But basically, that ACTH travels through the blood to the adrenal glands, and those are just above the kidneys, right? And it signals them to release glucocorticoid hormones, right? And the most important one of that is cortisol. And cortisol is often called the stress hormone because it plays a very central role in the body's reaction to pressure or danger, right? And it has many other important functions, but managing stress stress response is one of its key jobs. Okay, that was pretty technical. Drop a 1 if I need to re-explain something, or if you have any questions, let me know, because this was a pretty technical part. Let me know if everything is still clear. You don't need to know all the details out of your head of this, but just a little bit of background information on how it works, right? And all clear? Good to hear. Good to hear. So cortisol is produced to boost the body's energy. That's the base of it, right? And release stored glucose. And that's basically sugar, right? And it gives us fuel to respond to challenges, right? And, why would this process be there in our body? You might ask. Well, it's we have to look at it from like an evolutionary perspective, right? Because then it makes sense. For early humans, let's say, I don't know, 10, 20,000 years ago, when we were still hunters and gatherers, right? The bigger source of stress usually was hunger, right? Or a lack of energy. So the body developed this system to help us survive, basically, right? Whenever we were really hungry or we had energy, we started to get stress or anxiety, and then our body would produce cortisol to release the stored glucose and help us survive for longer. And those glucocorticoid hormones, like cortisol, they're also a biological marker of stress, right? Meaning their levels rise and fall depending on how stressed we are. Same as with the dopamine, right? We had that baseline and stuff. And interestingly, research has shown that cortisol levels in traders increase alongside market volatility. In other words, the more unpredictable a market is, usually the higher a body's stress response is to that market, right? Which kind of makes sense. Whenever more stuff starts to happen, pace starts to increase, the market starts to get faster. It's pretty logical that our body might not understand what's happening, interpret things as stress or as threats, and starts to produce cortisol and thus stress response. And as I said, this stress response isn't always harmful, right? In fact, there's a certain point, up to a certain point, it can be useful and even beneficial sometimes, right? And the way we describe this, or scientists describe this, is the idea of using an inverted U curve. And that's this. And there's a peak amount of level, or a level of glucocorticoids you can have in your body before it starts to have negative effects, right? And at low to moderate levels, stress improves your performance slightly, right? Because it sharpens your mind, it releases the glucose, that kind of stuff, right? So it kind of helps you a little bit. But at very high stress levels, stress becomes damaging and it reduces your performance, right? It starts to eat up your gray matter, for example, inside your brain. Um, some of the positive effects of stress, right, before the peak, right here, include extra stimulation of the nervous system, a sharper concentration and alertness, and higher motivation. Because cortisol interacts with the brain's dopamine system, right? The same system that we know is linked to reward and drive. However, when a trader faces losses, right, the negative consequences of stress can be experienced, right, because the level of glucocorticoids exceeds a certain threshold and stress becomes too intense, right? Does it make sense up until now? Hope it does. It's clear you were looking into cortisol levels in accordance to trading and glucose levels yesterday. It's perfect. The perfect topic, right? Anyway, let's continue. So, on to the next part, right? All sensory information, right? And sensory information is what we hear, what we see, what we can feel, all that, right? It first passes through this part of the brain, the thalamus, that we talked about earlier. And this thalamus kind of works like a router in computers, like internet router, right? It decides where information should go next, right? And from here, the brain has two main routes that it can take, right? It can take the long route, and that's from the thalamus to the cortex to the amygdala. And there's a short route from the thalamus right through the amygdala. So those are the two levels or two routes that it can take. The long route, information goes from the thalamus right here into the prefrontal cortex, and there it's analyzed in detail and logically processed, right? After that, it goes to the amygdala, and there it's checked for threats, right? This path is slower, but it allows for more careful and accurate thinking before reacting, right? Then we have the short route, and in the short route, you can already kind of see what's coming, right? In the short route, information skips the cortex and goes straight to the amygdala. And what this does, it provides an instant reaction to a threat, but without detailed processing, right? And you might ask yourself, why does your brain have two pathways? Why wouldn't just always use cortex then amygdala? Because it's more accurate and more detailed, right? Well, it's actually very useful. The brain uses this route when speed matters more than accuracy, right? Let's say you're in front of a speeding car, right? It's moving fast towards you. You want your brain to react fast, right, and not over analyze the situation to then determine is there a threat, yes or no. You want your brain to be very fast with it and be like, there's a threat, you have to act now, right? And that's where this is for. Go straight to the amygdala where the threat is examined, and that is when speed matters more than accuracy. Am I an MD? No, I'm not. No, I didn't study anything regarding biology or medicine or whatever in that area. I just really like the topic, so I researched it a lot because I also think when you're trading, it's helpful to understand yourself as a machine, because that way you can operate it better, right? Quote from Ethics for Living. Would I say that's conscious and subconscious thinking? Not really, because it both happens autonomously, right? It both happens automatically. You don't have to do anything for the brain to choose which route it's going to take. This is just normal information processing in your brain. But the difference is this is accurately and a little bit slower and critical, and this is just for high speed things, right? Um, you were looking into it and you were wondering how to create the most optimal conditions for yourself since you take ADHD meds. Interesting, interesting. Um, yeah. I don't know a lot about ADHD and meds surrounding it. I do know that the biggest part of ADHD is basically it comes down to a dopamine shortage. So most people are unable to concentrate or focus when they have ADHD because their brain doesn't produce enough dopamine, right? And you want to have dopamine created by certain stuff in order to stay focused. So honestly, I'd say they, and this is not health advice or something, so consult a doctor, take it with a grain of salt, but logically that would lead you to, um, you know, research how you could um, regain control of the dopamine system, logically, right? Um, but yeah, in other words, under stress, yeah, right, the brain usually prioritizes speed over accuracy, right? And this makes very much makes sense from like a survival perspective, right? But in trading, it can create problems, right? Because if we identify the fact that the brain will go from the thalamus to the amygdala when it reacts to potential threats, and we also know that opening a trade is seen as a threat by the body, 1 and 1 is 2, right? It can create problems, right? Like quick emotional reactions, panic selling, chasing price, all that kind of stuff, right? All those like instant emotional decisions, right? It's because of this. The brain instantly sets a signal. It's like this is, this is danger. It's a threat. You have to react now without thinking about it, right? And that's how it can override all the rational, well-planned decisions we make up front, right? A Renaissance man? Is that a? It sounds like a good thing. Let's see. Did I miss anything? No, not yet. So during those moments of acute stress, the brain kind of shifts gears, right? And it's when that short pathway suddenly becomes way more active, right? And the synapses in there, they become more excitable. And that means that the brain is primed to react quickly to fear, right? So whenever we're in a state of trading and we identify all different types of threats coming our way, which is just the market, but our brain processes it as a threat. It sees it as a threat or danger, even though we as a rational human know it's not a dangerous thing at all. Our brain still processes it that way. But at the same time, the prefrontal cortex, right here, the part of the brain that's responsible for rational thinking and self-control, reduces its influence over the amygdala, right? So this pathway starts to take over. This starts to become more excitable and more actionable, and this starts to like go a little bit more to the background, so to say, right? And the result of this is that fear and anxiety will start to take over, right? While logical thinking starts to weaken, right? And in this state, people often act impulsively without fully considering the consequences, right? Let's say you're in a state of complete tilting, right? In that modus where you're just smashing buttons and you're not thinking about the consequence of it at all, right? Why is that? It's because this pathway through the prefrontal cortex is not being used at all, right? So it actually skips your critical thinking and it just goes straight to action. So, risky or poorly thought out behavior becomes much more likely when we're in such a state. And, when we have been there, almost everyone has been there. Let's be real, right? We're traders. We all go through the same thing. Everyone has been there. So yeah, to put it simply, under fear, we start to become way more emotional and less rational. The tricky part is that we often don't realize it, right? And why do we don't realize it? Because in that moment, our ability to be critical of our own behavior, it's reduced, right? And in trading, this is why sudden losses or volatile conditions can suddenly trigger, for example, panic selling, revenge trading, chasing price, and basically any action that's driven by the emotional fast route compared to the rational slow route. Right? That probably sounds familiar for a lot of people, right? And let's see, people are typing it about it. And let's see if some people want to be a little bit interactive. How does it feel at that point in time? If you've ever experienced something like that, how does it feel when um, you're trading? You feel all the emotional stuff coming up. Yep, tunnel vision, exactly. Tiresome, no clarity, exactly. You've been there. No clarity, heated, overly focused on every tick. Exactly. That's a very good thing you mentioned there. You're overly focused. That's that amount of cortisol that's pumping in your body, making you very focused, right? It can be a good thing being extra focused, but at this time, your body perceives everything that's happening as a threat, and you start to get overly focused. Let's see. No control. Yep. Without direction, it's just madness. Exactly. Appreciate that, Tony. Appreciate that. Yeah, it will also help in every part of life. It doesn't, need to be about trading. It can be applied everywhere, of course. If you understand the body, um, you can apply it in every phase and part of life. You call it caveman mode, stuck in the present moment. Yeah, that's perfect. Caveman mode. I love that. Uh, it's a double-edged sword when taking Adderall. Apparently, it can help, but if cortisol spikes, then I can have much less cortisol. Yeah, I'm not sure on how Adderall works, to be honest. We don't have Adderall here in Europe, as far as or at least in the Netherlands, we don't have it. It's a different medicine branch that's used for ADHD treatment. So I can't comment on it. I have no idea. Um, but yeah, I've talked to a few people that also have seen very great results from it. I have spoken to people that have seen worse results from it. Honestly, I'm very I don't know enough about the topic to actually make a comment about it. I'd say. So yeah, let's continue. Next topic: anxiety and uncertainty before opening a position. Has anyone ever experienced wanting to trade or seeing your setup form, but not taking a trade or being uncertain? Any type of anxiety before we open the position. Current couple of weeks. So it's very relevant. Yesterday +1. Yep. So it's something that happens, right? Let's dive into that a little bit, right? Because you have it today. Yeah, often a lot of people have it. It's basically, I see this as like part of the fear of losing, right? Fear of losing is like a big thing, and then this is like the pre-stage of it, right? Um, so we have examined the processes, right, that happen in our body when we experience fear, right? Um, does everyone know or understand how a traumatic experience is fixed in our memory and why we start to fear when we are faced with the possibility of opening a position? Let's take a little bit of a detour, and we'll quickly talk about um, traumatic experiences and how they are fixed in memory. Right? I'm gonna use a very simple analogy um, uh, to tell you how it works. Right? let's say we have a little boy, right? A little kid, and he's walking around in the park, and that kid has never seen a dog in his life. Never, ever, ever has he seen a dog in his life, right? At that point, your mind does not have any record, not any information stored about dogs because it has never seen a dog in his life, right? What happens? Let's say the dog starts to attack the kid, right? That's the only event the kid has ever met a dog, right? The dog attacks the kid. What happens is the brain now starts to connect the dog to the attack, right? And it now understands, okay, the dog is a threat, and if I ever see a dog again, um, who knows what might happen, right? What's up, athlete? Good to see you here. Let's say a week later, the same kid is walking around another park, and there's another dog there, right? But this time, this dog is very sweet. It's not an aggressive dog at all. It's maybe even a slightly smaller dog. It's just very happy and a very cute dog, right? But the dog starts running towards the child just because it wants to play with the child or it wants to be petted or what else, whatever, right? It's a positive thing. But what happens is inside the brain of the kid, the kid sees the dog, the brain perceives and sees the dog and starts to be, okay, a dog is coming towards me. What now? And we already looked at it, right? Perceived threat, right here, right? Or a stress response. And the body is like, okay, what is all the information that we can gather about dogs in like a split second, right? And all the information the kid has stored in his brain about dogs is from the traumatic experience of the dog attacking him, right? So his first reaction is to maybe run away, be scared, all that kind of negative stuff, right? Even though the intention of the dog is not to be aggressive or biting or whatever, it's just happy, right? But the kid doesn't know that, right? But now the body has registered a traumatic experience, basically, right? And that traumatic experience is also attached to the body going below the dopamine baseline and trying to push us back up, right? So in this section now, we're gonna discuss the state that precedes fear, right? And that's anxiety. Let's see, I missed a couple comments. If you have anxiety while open a trade, you are clearly over leveraging. Could be a cause, yes, for sure, but there's more to it. It's also a part conditioning and experience, history, and all that kind of stuff that also goes into it, right? Because some persons or some people could have indeed the fact that they're over leveraging and therefore they're scared, but other people are honestly just too attached to the outcome of being wrong or right that even the amount of money doesn't even matter. It's just the fact that he could be wrong, and that's already inducing a lot of stress, right? That's also a possibility. Yeah, because your subconscious isn't wired to accept the success identity, fear of the unknown. That's good stuff. Yeah. If tilting and blowing accounts is traumatizing to us, and why don't we remember the pain and refrain from actions that will cause tilt? That's a very good question. I want to put this in the back burner because I'll cover this more in depth after I've finished the presentation. It's not too long anymore, and then we'll go into this because it's a very good question. Thank you, Tanner. So yeah. To begin, right? Let's define the difference between fear and anxiety, right? Fear arises in response to a clear threat, right? Right now. A threat right now. Whereas anxiety basically is a premonition of negative events in the future, right? It's kind of expecting negative events to come in the future. And let's see. It's a useful state to have, right? It's pretty useful for survival because it's also caused by the activation of the amygdala and the increase in the level of glucocorticoid hormones, all that stuff, right? Let's take two groups of animals as an example, right? We have two groups of animals. One group will live happily without anxiety, and they will get better nutrition, right? And due to the lack of fear of looking for a better place to feed, and in general, the quality of life, this group will be happy. It will be happier. The quality of life will be higher, right? Does that make sense? They live happily. They don't have anxiety because they get nutrition, right? They don't need to look for food, right? So their quality of life will be pretty good. Then we have the second group, and the second group is going to be in a constant state of anxiety, right? And why, right? Um, well, they will be very selective in their movement. They will be very selective in their nutrition, right? In general, it will be in a state of stress, right? Because they don't get fed every time, right? They have to look for food, and the possibility of not having food is there, right? Which leads to anxiety. Well, when animals from the first group encounter a threat in the form of a predator, um, they will die, right? As they will not be ready for this due to their lack of anxiety. They have not processed the threat before in their life, right? So when a predator comes, they don't really understand the fact that they have to run away because anxiety has never been something in their life, right? Of course, we also have stuff like instinct and stuff, but we're not going to look at instinct in this example, right? Um, so accordingly, this group will not give offspring and will not pass on its genes further, right? Because they will die. Unlike the second group, the anxious genes are passed on further in the population, right? So you see what's happening in there? Humans always have anxiety and that kind of stuff because it's passed down us on through genes, right? Because it's a key survival thing. It's basically natural selection, right? If something has no survival instinct, it's used in memes or something like something. Oh, a cat has zero survival instinct because he's very silly, for example, right? But basically, whenever something has no survival instinct, it's most likely prone to die, and it won't survive, and the genes won't pass on, right? And the no anxiety, no survival skill genes will be weeded out eventually, right? It's natural selection. So yeah, anxiety has always had a survival value, right? For our ancestors, for example, it's being overly cautious, or often meant overly cautious, usually meant staying alive, right? And evolution usually favored those who worried about potential dangers, right? Because it's safer to overestimate a threat than to ignore it and risk death. That's just how it is. The problem is that in the modern world, the same mechanism is triggered in situations where actual physical survival is not at stake, right? Could be, for example, let's say you have a heated conversation with your boss, or giving a presentation, or, for example, trading inside a financial market, right? For traders, this stress and anxiety usually causes the mind to overstimulate the chances of a negative outcome, right? And even when all the conditions for a solid trade are present, fear can still distort our judgment and create hesitation, right? And instead of seeing the setup clearly, the brain starts to amplify the "what if I lose" scenario, right? What if I lose? That's the kind of thing that starts to wander around in the back of your head, and that's why most people won't open the trade, right? And this is why anxiety and fear can lead to traders to avoid taking trades altogether, right? It's not that the trade setup is invalid or that your model doesn't work. It's just that the brain is wired to avoid perceived danger. And on top of this, there's a psychological effect known as omission bias, right? Omission bias. And people tend to judge action more harshly than inaction, even if the result is the exact same. It's just something in psychology. In other words, let's say you take a trade that loses, right? It could feel worse than skipping a trade that could have won, right? And because this, traders often stress, right? And they will lean toward inaction, right? They will rather choose to sit it out rather than risk feeling responsible for a loss, right? And you see what's like the main theme in here? It's being attached to the outcome. That's the most important thing, right? All right, let's see. I'm gonna open up Trading View real quick, just so I have something to draw on. Because Tanner here asked a very good question. By the way, we're done with the presentation part. but I do want to go over Tanner Trade's question. So this is the basics and everything surrounding fear of losing and the explanation of how it works inside our brain. Before we move on with Tanner's question, do we have any questions in the chat of things that are unclear or things you'd like to explore? Anything at all? The addiction to losing. Yeah, kind of. Let's see. No questions so far, or I see people typing. Never mind. Let's wait a few minutes to get the questions in because I see people are typing, and then we'll continue. Let's see. I'll move it back to the presentation for now. This is more fun to look at. There we go. This is a nice picture. Oh, let me know what you think about this. I missed that. Oh, my bad. Let's see. Time said, for me, what helps detach a little easier was not putting so much pressure on your trading, not having the outcome dictate how your life would be outside of the charts. For example, if I am being codependent on receiving a payout or getting a withdrawal from a live account to pay bills, don't expect your trading to support your lifestyle. For me, a maturity point was to allow my trading to evolve in those things through compounding good habits, like you talked about. Of course, all those things are only possible in a long-term perspective. I love that. That's perfect. Exactly. Don't you start detaching the outcome by not being dependent on trading. I 100% agree on that. Trading forces you to read a lot of psychology books. Yeah, exactly. Reminded you of the flow state experience. Need a sweet spot of challenge and skill to light up the brain. Yes, I do agree. Um, yeah, treating a dedicated time slot to focus on trading. That's good stuff. Um, how do I deal with the hesitation when you know it's not your strategy? What if it's just overthinking and are you conning yourself outside of the trade? Most of these hesitations come after taking a loss, predominantly after a losing streak. It's a good question. Let's pull those up as well. Right. We'll go over those two questions a little bit more in depth. So we have this one, and then we have the other one by Tanner. Let me grab a screenshot. Some in here might already know what answer I'm gonna give to this one because I've maybe said it like I don't know a few times already. Let's start with Tanner's question first. Let's see. Are you still here? For sure time. I'll give my feedback on that after this as well. Is Tanner still here? Yeah, he's still here. If tilting and blowing accounts is traumatizing to us, then why don't we remember the pain and refrain from actions that will cause tilt? Okay, there's two ways we can approach this, right? The first thing is we have to understand dopamine. And dopamine in our body kind of works like a baseline. There's like a baseline of dopamine inside our body, right? And let's say whenever something good happens, right? Our dopamine starts to go up. And then it starts to go back to the baseline, right? That kind of makes sense. And this makes us feel happy, for example. It spikes dopamine. This is what our brain is craving, essentially, right? Um, there's done an experiment with monkeys, right? And they checked the baseline, or they looked at the dopamine levels inside their brain, and therefore they could measure it. And they did an experiment by giving a monkey some food after they flicked a switch, right? Or put on the light, right? A light bulb. So we have a light bulb, right? Like this. It's a very ugly light bulb. Let me just put an emoji instead. So there's a light bulb here, but not in here. That makes no sense to me. There we go. You have the light bulb. Oh, you can't see. Oh, that's my bad. Let me switch it to trading view for you guys. There we go. My bad. Now you didn't see my ugly light bulb. So we have a light bulb, right? And they did an experiment with monkeys, right? A good deal, exactly. Whenever the light was turned on, he would get some food, right? So some nice bananas or something, or whatever it was, some seeds or nuts or something. And what happened first is like the baseline went like this, then he got the snack, right? So his dopamine spiked, right? And then it went to return to baseline eventually, right? And this makes kind of sense, right? We get a reward. That's fun. So we get happy, right? Makes sense. Eventually, what happens is, what's up, 2 degrees? It's good to see you in here. Hope all is well. So eventually, what starts to happen is the monkey starts to understand that when the light starts to go on, he will receive a reward afterwards, right? So what happens is, on that dopamine baseline is, the light turns on, and he starts to get a little bit of dopamine because he understands, I'm going to get a snack after this, right? And then he receives the snack and he gets his reward. And that's all fine, right? The anticipation of the reward and the reward itself, right? But after a while, after testing it a few times, the monkey understood that this equals reward, right? Light bulb equals a reward. And then what starts to happen on the baseline is this, right? Whenever the light turns on, his dopamine spikes, right? And then when he gets the actual snack, it only spikes like this, right? Which is crazy, actually, to me, right? The light bulb being turned on hits more than actually getting a reward, right? That makes sense, right? Um, Let me know if you guys can still follow along or if I need to go a little bit slower. Type a 1 in the chat if we're all good or if we're, yeah. Okay, I see some ones. Let's go. Okay, because this is important back information or backstory information to understand this question. Why, if blowing accounts and traumatizing, is traumatizing us, why don't we remember the pain and refrain from actions that will cause it? Right. So we understand that eventually the anticipation of a reward gets bigger than the actual reward, right? Let's translate this to trading. We understand that eventually the outcome of a trade could be a win, which is good, is happy, right? But we also understand that our body starts to understand eventually that opening a trade, right, could lead to a winning trade, right? So actually pressing the buy or sell button is right here, and closing the trade inside a profit inside right here, right? And just as the same with the monkey, eventually our body starts to understand that opening a trade can lead to a reward, right? And our body wants to chase a reward. So it's like, yeah, well, if I could get a reward, let me just open it, right? And therefore, what happens is eventually our body starts to understand, oh, I just need to start opening trades. Audio is acting up. Anyone else? Let me know. Audio should be good. Otherwise, it's just Discord again, probably. All good? Okay, good. We're still here. So the same thing happens on the negative side, right? Our body registers something negative with below the baseline, right? So let's say we take a losing trade, right? And we're still very emotional. We get a losing trade, and our body now understand that it's a negative thing, right? And our body will get below the baseline, which is very unfortunate. What happens in here is our body understands and our brain kind of chases dopamine at all times, right? That's something we probably are familiar with. So at this point, our body is like, okay, we're pretty, far below baseline. How do we get up here, right? There's room in between here that doesn't need to be there. We need to get up here, right? And our body will start to be in the stress situation, right? That we just looked at in the two different routes the brain can take, right? Uh, this one, right? Oh, there goes my picture. Right? This one, we just understood that this is all fast reactions and basically speed, right? And once we took that losing trade, our body is below the baseline of dopamine, and it will be inside this state right here. So we'll start to grab every single thing that it can remember off the bat that produces a lot of dopamine, right? In the same way, our body remembers, oh, wait a minute, opening trades, that's the key, that produces dopamine, right? So we'll start you to force, eventually your body will tell you, you need to open another trade because that's going to fix it, right? And it does fix it, like temporarily, because you get dopamine and you get back at the baseline, right? So that's our body remembering that repeating that same stuff that doesn't work is helpful because it just produces dopamine, right? That's the first part of understanding this, right? Does it make sense that your body understands um, or remembers quick actions that are equal to dopamine production, and therefore it kind of neglects the fact that tilting and blowing isn't good for you? Yes, it's kind of traumatizing, um, but it's not the initial traumatizing effect that it has or that losing trades has on us, for example, right? And now, of course, there's more to this, right? It's not only the brain, and just how can I say, uh, dopamine and cortisol and all that kind of stuff, right? There's more to it. And what are other ways that you can kind of explore this for yourself? Well, a lot of people, they will do some stuff like, for example, meditation to get a clear head. That's one. I'm curious, what do people in here do to get in a good mind state, to um, avoid tilting, to avoid blowing accounts, all that kind of stuff? What do you guys do? Cold shower, play guitars, walk, chess puzzles, cold shower and drinking, breath work, take a pause. That's good stuff. Let your body cool down. Indeed, pausing, taking a walk. Let your bodily functions reset, and not get overstimulated. Right. I hope Tanner is still in here, because now we're gonna dive in some other stuff that I was introduced by and learned from a very good friend of mine called Jake. He's very well versed inside this. He's also an escape. His name is Jake Fasten. He told me about this and taught me about this um, for the first time. And it goes a little bit deeper into the psychology sector, right? And specifically into Carl Jung's work. Is anyone familiar with him or familiar with his work? Type a 1 in the chat if you know about it. Of course, good to hear. No. Type a 2 if you don't know. Typing a 2. I see a few 2s. Okay. So basically, from Carl Jung's perspective, right? He says every single person has a shadow. And the shadow kind of represents the repressed, denied, or unconscious aspects of a psyche, right? Of a person. And it's basically the parts of ourselves we don't want to see, right? And these are not only negative qualities like greed, fear, or impulsivity or whatever, but he says, they are also untapped potential. And they are kind of instincts we cannot really fully integrate, right? And he says, Carl Jung says, if ignored, right, the shadow, if it's ignored, it will start to break through unconsciously, right, and often in destructive ways. And, right, so, we have the trader's quest for consistency, right? Most traders consciously strive for rules, structure, and consistency, right? That's what we're after. So a trading plan, risk management, strict rules for entries, exits, and we have a desire to be disciplined and to avoid emotional trading, right? That's what we are after, right? Is there anyone in this chat that does not want this, right, when they're trading? Most likely not. Most likely it's something we're all striving for. But despite this, often many traders will start to sabotage themselves, right? They over leveraging, revenge trading, deviating from their plan, blowing accounts, tilting, all that kind of stuff, right? So if we look at it from a Carl Jung shadow work perspective, right? Here's how kind of the shadow starts to show up in this cycle, right? It's basically it's control versus chaos. And what I mean with that is the following. Let me put up Discord on my right monitor, by the way. The conscious ego seeks order, right? That's our conscious order. I'll often follow my rules perfectly, right? And the unconscious shadow kind of resists. It's driven by the impulses of greed, FOMO, the thrill of the risk and all that kind of stuff. And when it's repressed, these impulses start to return violently, often in the form of like catastrophic trades, over trading like crazy. And a trader might just say, I just want to be consistent, right? But unconsciously, they might crave excitement. They might chase validation or the feeling of being special when catching like a big move or something, right? And the shadow then kind of exploits this hidden desire, which will lead to impulsive trades. And also the fact that you just want to be consistent, the shadow self will kind of exploit this to force you to trade, to be like, yeah, go on, take a trade, you can take a win today, all that kind of stuff. And then the market kind of becomes a canvas for that trader psyche. And instead of seeing price action, what will happen is the trader kind of starts to project their shadow self onto the market. And then the fear of losing starts to become, the market's against me. And greed will, become, this is the big one. I can't miss it, And by not owning these emotions, the trader will start to fight them externally and, they lose. So, for example, blowing accounts is not just only poor discipline. It can be a compulsive repetition of an inner conflict, right? Like I said, a trader might, for example, seek consistency. They might seek discipline, right? Let's say we have the life cycle of a trading account, of a prop firm account, after you've just blown one, right? Let's say you're off the bat, you've just blown one. You're devastated. You might be a little bit disappointed in yourself because it happened again. Let's describe that life cycle. What's the first thing that happens when you're like, gonna start with a new account, right? Most likely the first thing for a lot of people is, I've just blown it. You know what? this next one, I'm gonna be disciplined. I'm gonna be this. I'm gonna be that. I'm gonna be following the rules, right? And in the first few days, it happened again. In the first few days, you're very actively being, I just blowed it and I'm going to start this new one very well, right? You start off with your good habits again. You start off with your journaling again. You start off with all your good habits and everything is going fine, right? No, everything is perfect at that moment in those first few days. Is this something that people sometimes have? That they, after a sequence of bad stuff, you start off kind of resetting and like, okay, I gotta really, um, gather myself and start to act properly again, right? That's something that happens. And eventually, after a while, you start to slack off, right? And your inner self is seeking that kind of organized work again. It's seeking that consistency. It's seeking that discipline again, right? And when do we now understand, or where does that kind of phase happen? Right at the start, after you've blown an account, right? So that shadow self starts to exploit that and act out explosively, leading you to blow your account again because it understands that after the blown account, you'll start to get into I'm gonna reset, I'm gonna, do this, go do that, go do everything well again phase, right? So it seeks that actively, but it will start exploiting it by leading you to explosively blowing your account because it knows that the phase of doing well comes after it, right? So it seeks that, but in order to get there, it will start to blow up first, right? So that's why tilting and blowing account, yes, it's traumatizing to us. We don't remember the pain because it's driven from way, way deeper inside of us than we might understand, right? So I hope that clears it up a little bit as to why this happens, not only from a biological perspective, but also a little bit of a psychological perspective. Yeah, but ironically, it's also a level of comfort, exactly, because the body is used to it as well. Now, let's go into this question, right, Kimosabe? How to deal with the hesitation when you know it's not your strategy. I'm gonna pull out the bus analogy again, and I saw someone today mentioning it, and I think it was who was it today? I saw it somewhere in the industry's chat that someone mentioned it. Basically, I have no setup no trades. That was it. I knew it was him. Yeah. Basically, I have like a little a bus analogy that will explain your whole question and start to like frame it differently, right? Let's say you are at work or you are in the city, in the center, right? And you need to get home. So you start walking towards like the central bus station, right? Where all the buses gather, and then you just have to, you know, pick your bus and go home, right? Let's say, um, let's use some emojis today to make it even more fun. Let's say this is you, right? Kimosawa, that's you for now. And oh, this is perfect. This is bus, analogy type of V2. Let's say you're at the bus station, right? And this is you. And there's 6 buses waiting at the station. Which one are you gonna pick? Tell me. Mr. Kimosabe, which bus are you gonna pick? Is he still here? Or did he leave? Oh, the middle back. Yeah, okay. The middle back row. Yeah, okay, but which of the 6 buses are you gonna take, right? You are here in the city center. You need to go home. Which bus do you pick? Right? It's not a trick question. It's just think of it very simply. You're probably gonna take the bus that leads to your house, right? That leads to the bus station, right down the street, right? That's probably the most logical choice, right? You're gonna take the bus that's gonna take you home, right? Country roads take you home, yeah. But is that right, Kimosabe? You'll probably take the bus that will take you home, right? Makes the most sense. Right. So on your way home on that bus, right? You've taken that bus 10, 20, 30 times already, right? 40 times. You take about it. Um, you take the bus every single day. You know that bus, right? So you probably also know how many stops are there before you get home. You know the route it takes, the route it takes. You know the scenery around it. You're probably familiar with all that stuff, right? Because you've ridden that bus every day, right? Sounds pretty logical, right? So let's say you're on the station. Let's say this bus right here, and this is bus 12, right? This is your bus. But let's say you're at the station and bus 12 is not there yet. What now? What are you gonna do? Tell me. What's your game plan for getting home when the bus just hasn't arrived yet? Let's say, yeah, waiting. Yeah, call an Uber, also possible. Yeah, you're gonna wait probably, right? Figure out the time. But you know, we just say the bus is coming in 10 minutes. Let's say, right? But it's not yet there, or might come in 20 minutes. You just wait, right? There's nothing. You chill out and wait, right? There's nothing, going on. You're just waiting. That's it. And when it comes, you're gonna take the bus home, and then you're home, and you go get something to eat, and all is well, right? What happens? Let's say this bus starts to, you know, um, start up its engines, right? And you see it's gonna leave soon. What's that gonna do with you? What has that to do with you when you see bus? Let's say this bus 7 or something goes to the complete other direction of the city, right? You don't even live there, but you see, yeah, you don't care, right? Most likely you're gonna be like, yeah, who cares? I don't even, the bus isn't even going to my house. I don't care, right? Okay, cool. Let's say, bus 7 drives away. Oh shit, bus 7 loses the sign. Drives away and it's on its way. It's gone. Okay, what does that do with you? No interest. You don't care. It's not even your bus. Who cares, right? Then suddenly you see, uh, let's grab him, and we'll grab um this gentleman or the judge. We'll grab uh this lady, whatever, right? You see all these people, and you see them heading towards. Let me grab them like this, and you see them walking towards this bus, right? And they're all happily getting inside the bus, and they're stepping on the bus. Oh, there we go. Let me grab all these people. Not you, these people. And they get on the bus and they start to drive away. Are you gonna then be like, oh shit, those 3 people caught that bus, I'm gonna run after it? I hope not, right? Probably you're still gonna wait, like, right? Or what's gonna happen with you at this point when you see those people get on the bus and drive away? What's happening? Kimosabe, tell me. What's going on inside your brain at that point when you're waiting for the bus? Where's your bus? Yeah, but like, most like, your bus is gonna come eventually, right? You know it's gonna come eventually, right? Because you've ridden that bus every single day. You know it's gonna come. But do you care, that these people are gonna drive away with a different bus? Most likely not, right? Because you don't care, because once again, it's not your bus, right? So you have no interest. And then eventually, bus 7 comes, you get in and you drive away home and everything as well, right? What would have happened if you were impatient and you were like, you know what? I'm not gonna wait on my own bus. I'm gonna take this bus. This is bus 5, right? You're gonna take bus 5 for today, and you're gonna be like, screw it. I'm just gonna take a different bus that I don't even know. Like I said, in this time, you don't know the stops it's gonna take. You don't know the route it's gonna take. You don't know the scenery. You don't know where to get off, right? It's all a gray area. You have no idea what's gonna happen. You don't know where you're gonna end up, right? And what if we just all translated it with, instead of bus, it's going to be trade or trading plan, right? The first step to deal with the hesitation, knowing when it's not your, when you know it's not your strategy, is to think of this. It's not your bus. It's not going to take you home. So whenever you're going to enter, when you know it's not for you, it's going to be a bad time. You don't know where to get out. You don't want to be left at the bus stop, though. True. But what happens if you get left at the bus stop? That's okay. You'll know that your bus comes eventually, right? Your bus always comes. If you know your system, your trading system, you know, let's say you have 100 trades back tested or whatever, you know there's always going to be another trade, right? There's always information about your system that you know, and you just already know because you know there's always another buzz, there's always another trade. You never, you know that it's always going to come, it's never going to stop, right? So why risk a bad experience with a bad buzz ending up somewhere on, the other side of town, where suddenly you have to pay even more money to get back to your house, right? Because you took a losing trade because it was outside of your system, right? Why risk that and waste your mental capacity, get all the stress and stuff from taking a very bad trade, and instead just wait. Just wait for your buzz to come. And when it comes, then you enter, right? What if it's just you're overthinking and you're conning yourself outside of the trade, right? This would be, it is in your system, but you're conning yourself, right? The first step to finding out if this is true is to understand your system to its core, right? If you understand your system and your edge to its core and to everything there is to know about your system, there won't be any gray area in your system that you or that you're gonna experience, right? You're not gonna be in any gray area. If you know your system completely, you're knowing your system completely means erasing all the gray areas, right? Having planned for all the scenarios, knowing your model in and out, that's basically weeding out all the gray areas. If there is no gray area left, you will never ever have this again because you understand your model to such a degree that there's no reason and no need for hesitation at all, right? But if you start to move outside of your system, you're gonna move into uncharted territories, basically. You're gonna move into situations where you do not know everything, right? So there's gonna be a lot of gray areas there, right? And you don't know how to move in those gray areas because it's not your system, right? So most of these hesitations come after taking a loss, predominantly after taking a losing streak, right? If you understand your system, you also understand the probabilities. So you also understand your max losing streak. You will understand what's normal inside the scope of your system. Let's say your system has a maximum losing streak of, let's say, 6 straight, right? Cool. If you have a losing streak of 4 trades, should you panic? No, right? Because you know it's still within the boundaries of your trading plan, right? Let's say you have a losing streak of 7. Should you panic then? Also no, because it's like right outside the binaries of like the tested data, but we never know what's going to happen in the future, right? Do you have a very large losing streak outside of that? Then yes, it's time to evaluate if you've been taking trades inside or outside of your system, right? And more likely than not, you've been, trading outside of your system. Or it could also be for some people that they have been trading, but with a correct strategy, with a tested system, but not applying their edge because let's say they miss 25% of the trading sessions, right? Or they're rushing or whatever, right? And because they miss a lot of the trading sessions, they're not able to enforce the edge on a system that is existent, right? There is an edge, but if you're not able to actually apply the edge, then it's still gonna could be unprofitable, even though the strategy itself is correct, right? There's also stuff to take into account. So it all eventually leads to knowing your system inside and out. That's the most important part about it. And then I had to look at another picture that was sent in. I'm gonna scroll back up. So you said, yeah, it's not merely technical. Yeah, it's an extremely beautiful awareness you tapped into. This is where psychology reveals its sharpest edge. Yeah, that's the failure of success and the state of success and not being, and not knowing it well enough. That's a good point. You agree with this? Sometimes you just doubt that it's your boss, right? And if you don't know if it's your boss or not, you already know the answer of what you need to fix, right? Because if you you see 6 buses in a row and you're not sure if it's bus 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 that takes you home, there's only one thing you can do, and that's study or check the bus schedule, right? And know the bus schedule and be like, okay, I know that my bus is bus 7. If you know by heart that your bus is bus 7, you will never ever doubt again about which bus you have to take, right? You always know it's bus 7, right? Because it's every day the same bus. And that leads you, you have to know your system inside and out, and that will lead you to, you know, avoid hesitation and avoid the doubt of if it's your bus or not. So yeah, I hope that cleared it up a little bit, and that you can do something with that. Any feedback on time? Um, the fear of success. It's a good thing. I like the message for sure. The market will indeed only ever give you what you subconsciously already accept, and that kind of ties into something a lot of us Christians say, and it's a saying, and it's like, live as if your prayers have already been answered, and you will get them. And it basically means that if you live as if all the things you've wanted, such as success, are already there, your body and your mind will start to open up to it. And then you'll realize that the only thing that stands in between you and that success, or that successful person version of you, the only thing that stands in between it is the concept of time, right? Exactly your name. The only thing that stands in between it is the concept of time, because it already happened, but not at this time, but later, right? So the only thing that's going to be in between it is time. That's it. Yeah, psychology, knowing yourself, and understanding the aspects to this today, yeah, they're key for sure. And it all, you know, leads from a quote from FX for Living, and he said, um, "The better you understand the machine, the better you can operate it," which is true. If you don't know all, the ins and out of how to drive a car, you're not gonna be able to drive it properly, right? Unless it's maybe like an automatic or something or whatever. I don't know, but um, if you've never driven stick before, you're probably not gonna get the car forward, right? So you have to understand how it works. Same as with the mind. You have to understand how the mind works in order to operate it better, right? It's not that you cannot operate it without it, but you're able to do it better with. Because if you understand all these biological things happening in your brain, if you understand all these processes in your brain that I talked about today, it also helps in the moment, because you just understand, what I'm feeling right now is basically just this chain reaction of stuff happening in my brain. It's not real. It's all just a chain reaction of different chemicals that are being produced in my brain that lead me to think like this, right? And if you start to understand that, it's easier to deal with it eventually. So yeah, any other questions? Otherwise, we'll kind of round up the stream a little bit by here. Bless this mess says, game changer for you. Was changing my self image. Reading Psycho Cybernetics book helped you a lot. Genuinely, I now genuinely consider myself a trader that knows the system and can generate profits in a market in the long run. When you begin, is difficult because your self image could still stay in the beginner phase. Yeah, that's true. Your self image and the way you look at yourself and the things you tell yourself specifically, um, are super important, because our subconscious will pick up from it. It will start to learn from it and start to pick up from all the things that that you tell it. We cannot we cannot train our subconscious actively. It will only pick up things. And if you talk bad about yourself a lot of times, it will start to pick that up, right? And what did we learn today? What happens in stress responses? Our body will grab to the nearest available information that it can find in times of stress, and then it will start to dip into the subconscious, and then it will only see the negative stuff you've said about yourself, which only reinforces the bad behavior, right? And if you turn it around, you only talk positively about yourself, be as delusional as you can be while still being realistic. It will tap into the good stuff you've told yourself and told, and your subconscious will pick up on that and will start to enforce that eventually. Thank you for being here, No Setup, No Trade. Enjoyed the stream? Oh, I'm glad you did, man. Appreciate it. Let's see. Let's give it a few more questions and then we'll round up the stream. It's enough brain tackling information for today. But yeah, be sure to be there for the next part, because in the next part we're actually gonna dive into, how can we fix the fear of losing? How can we fix it? And how can we tackle that part, right? And it's like you've been reading my mind. Yeah, but because it's basic human biology and stuff, right? And it's also because we're all traders, we always go through the same stuff together in a sense, right? So we always know what everyone's going through. I've been there. Most other people have been there. So in that way, we can kind of look into each other's minds. Um, yeah, I appreciated the time. I enjoyed it too. I'm glad you enjoyed it too as well. Thank you, Bless. I appreciate it. If you want to, I'm gonna be posting the stream as soon as possible. So you can always rewatch the start if you're interested. So just so you know. So yeah, I want to thank everyone for being here. I appreciate everyone's time. And if you, that's all good, Jason. Priorities on top, right? Yeah. So I want to thank everyone. I appreciate everyone going here or being here. I hope I'll see you in the next session. And then yeah, thank you for the attention. I hope you learned something today. And then